Lots of people suffer from depression, and lots of people suffer from it silently.
Anything you put in your body is going to have an impact on your mental health.
There can be confusion sometimes between feeling low and depression.
We want to get up and get going, and that's what's going to help us.
We know that there is a place for medication for some people that can really help.
I mean, when you show up for somebody, that's such a big step.
I think the key is that depression is treatable, and you can get better with the right type of help.
Hello to all of you watching and welcome to the latest episode of Bupa's Inside Health. I'm Dr. Zoe Williams and today our topic is understanding depression. Now, depression affects around 1 in 10 people over the course of their lives, and that number has been rising. According to the Office for National Statistics, more people have experienced moderate or severe depressive symptoms since the pandemic. So the chances are that either you or someone you know has experienced the condition. But depression is still a mystery to many. In our research, we found that over 80% of people with depression don't believe the condition is very well understood. And this can make it difficult to recognise, accept and support those affected, whether that's ourselves or our loved ones. And that's why, with the help of our experts, we'll be unpacking the condition for you today. First up, I'll be speaking to Matt Johnson as he shares his personal experience with depression over the past 20 years. And then we'll be joined by clinical expert Kieran Calder. And Kieran is the Head of Therapy Services at Priory Hospital, North London. And she'll be explaining the cycle of depression and its symptoms. And after that, we'll provide you with help to break that cycle and some small supportive steps that can help you or others to manage it. And finally, you'll want to stay tuned for our Q&A, where we'll be answering as many of your questions as possible. So please do send yours in on the chat and we'd love to hear from you. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that we may be covering some sensitive topics, including suicide. So please bear in mind and take care of yourself. As I mentioned earlier, I am very lucky to have Matt Johnson here with me today. Matt is a broadcaster, mental health campaigner and ambassador for the charity Mind, as well as the presenter of the really insightful documentary Depression and Me. So Matt, thank you for joining us today. Now, I know that you have first-hand experience of living with depression. You've done loads of amazing work to raise awareness, but would you be happy to just give us, I guess, an overview and share what your experience has been?
So depression for me has been around for probably for as long as I can remember, looking back in hindsight. And it wasn't until really about 20 years ago was when I first have some recollections of symptoms, really. Only when it went really well, my life, when I would do some fun work, etc., I wasn't feeling any joy in those moments. So from like 2004 through to 2008 was when I was really kind of tested with my mental health. And it got so bad at one point that I was pretty desperate. I couldn't really talk to myself or anybody about that. I didn't really have a grip on what I was experiencing at all. And it manifested with me having a really down period of my life when I did the most natural thing that I thought that was the best for me, which was to drink a lot of alcohol and to self-soothe. And it got to a point in 2009 when things got very desperate for me. It seemed like a point in my life when I just couldn't block out this negative mood that I couldn't shake. There was no joy in my life, there was no happiness, and I felt incredibly alone. And that loneliness took me to a place where I took myself to Spain in the Christmas of 2009, and I tried to take my own life. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and from then on, and really from that entire experience out in Spain, from then on, I kind of knew that I had a second chance to kind of work this out, and every day since then, really, that's been my entire kind of process or purpose, is to try and work out myself, work out why I was in that situation, because on paper it doesn't seem, really, it didn't seem really why I should be in that situation. I was, I grew up in a nice household and all that type of stuff. And I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about myself in this period, in that 15 years since 2009. Now I'm very fortunate to be able to kind of share my experience without getting incredibly triggered, and to be able to work with people like yourself, psychiatrists and psychologists, and to train as a counsellor to try and help other people navigate this feeling, because we know all too well how difficult this is for everyone. Lots of people suffer from depression, and lots of people suffer from it silently. There's not many signposts. There's lots of different reasons why people feel this, and it's a really big part of my life now, trying to help people find their way through this awful storm that is depression.
And you've done, I'm aware of a lot of the work that you've done in raising awareness, supporting other people. Going back to when you were first having these symptoms, you can identify, and resulting in, that fortunately you didn't, go through with what would have been an absolute tragedy. Do you think that other people around you had already identified that something was wrong?
Yeah, weirdly, a lot of the shame that I had attached to my suicide attempt was, I think I managed to dissuade people and let them know that I was fine.
Yeah.
That's the weirdest thing about it for me. I was then training as a journalist at ITV Wales News. Things were seemingly going okay. I had a really lovely girlfriend, I had a great family behind me. And internally, I was really, really struggling, and I just couldn't work that out. My brain just didn't know how to work that out. So I was the biggest kind of mask-wearing, saddest, most fun person you'll probably ever meet. So no, my parents didn't necessarily know, my close friends didn't know, my colleagues certainly didn't know, which is the most frustrating thing about it, which is one of the most enlightening pieces of awareness that we could share, is that depression takes many guises, and is often the funniest and loudest person in the room, which I think at times I was, but there's many layers to each person,
Absolutely. And did you know at that time that it was depression? When did the word depression first stick in your mind? I think this is the thing.
My father won't mind me saying this, but he struggled with his mental health for a long time. So I had a feeling he was in that world. At that time in 2009, the awareness wasn't as good as what it is now. We never would have had shows like this right now. No podcasts, no online presence of awareness campaigns from different charities.
It just wasn't really the done thing to talk about, think about depression, was
And I
it?
think as well, interestingly, depression for a man was seen as usually this thing that some cop had in a movie that was kind of cool, the darker side of people, the kind of post-war PTSD type thing. And all these guys were seen as heroes, and it was okay almost. It was kind of a dark Batman cool thing, weirdly. So that's the only awareness I had of it. And also, your brain plays tricks on you. I thought I was cursed. I didn't see any way out of it. And if I had genuinely seen something like this and could relate to it, it would have been, as I know now, the change in my trajectory of my life. Diagnosis would have been so important. So, no, depression, I didn't see myself as somebody that was depressed. I saw myself as somebody that was damned and cursed, and this was just my life and my brain, and I couldn't function in reality anymore. And that was the worst thing. And in hindsight, yes, it was depression, and I've been diagnosed with it. And it's just it was a really difficult thing for me to get my head around anything at that time.
I think even though we have come a long way in talking about our mental health and mental health conditions, it's still really prevalent that people don't identify it in themselves, or like you said, they've actually got a good life. And I often hear patients, they come to me and it's the shame that they feel that almost like I don't deserve to have depression because my life's good. But it just highlights that depression doesn't always affect anybody.
But it's affected as well by your self-worth. So I, after lots of therapy, have worked out that the basic nucleus of my thought pattern was that I didn't deserve good things. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't lovable, and all these different things that you learn through lots of great talking therapists. And when you have that self-belief at that low level, you don't feel like you deserve to go and speak to anybody. You look for the immediate soothing of a pint of wine or whatever it was, or whatever I can get my hands on. So I was definitely one of these people that just thought, oh, there's much worse people out there than me. I can't even work this out, so what's the point? I don't deserve any better.
So how do we then, how can we look out for people and spot if somebody is really struggling? Because as you said, you were very capable of masking it and making it appear like everything was fine, when actually secretly you were in a really bad place.
And this is the really difficult thing. Like I said, you know, the brightest spark in the room could have the most deepest problems, you know. And I think one of the most important things for me, whilst you do this kind of work to try and find compassion and love for yourself, you immediately have that for other people, because you do realize that everybody is nuanced and there's layers to everyone. And for me, I suppose the warning signs, I can't even imagine what they would have been 15, 16 years ago, but the change in moods, the maybe some of the things I would have said would have been a little signpost to what I was feeling. The amount of partying and the amount of like disassociation I was going through would have been a cause for concern. And I think if you have that awareness of yourself and you know those signs for yourself, I think it's easier to spot for other people. It starts within almost. Like I would say now, if you did have an inkling or just a moment where you think, actually, this person doesn't seem that well or that happy, or they're consistently seemingly unhappy or needing to go out or needing external validation. Those are the signs, you know, and finding a way to get to that person is super important.
So I think it's following your gut, isn't it? You know, as humans, we can often belittle how powerful our gut instinct is. And if you know somebody, you care about somebody, or even if you don't know them that well, it's a work colleague, if you have that gut instinct, oh, that was a bit off, or that made me feel uncomfortable, or made me feel very low, it's worth just exploring, being brave enough, I think, to explore it, isn't it? You're not going to do any harm.
What's the downside?
Absolutely.
You know, it's always ask if somebody's okay and do it in the right, nicest, safest way possible, really.
Yeah. I think there can be confusion sometimes between the difference between feeling low and depression. How would you explain the difference between those? Well,
for me, and through my experience and through what I've learned about it, is the amount of time in which you feel down and are lacking in like some sort of lust for life, not seeing any joy in anything, because situational depression is a thing. Unfortunately, my poor doggy passed away 3 weeks ago, and
I'm sorry.
and rightly so. I should feel down. That's a real, genuine reason. And things happen in your life where you feel down for numerous different reasons, and they should be honoured and treated in the same kind of way. I think with like clinical depression or depression, where what we're talking about, what I went through, is a long period of time when you're suffering and there's no joy in life. Like I said, the only times I knew, oh my God, I must be in trouble here, was because everything around me was fine. I had my job, I had a great girlfriend, and my family life was fine. And on paper, that should make somebody happy. That's not living through grief. That's somebody. And when you're not feeling joy in those moments, when it's difficult to get out of bed, I really struggled with that. And then, therefore, little things kind of fell by the wayside for me. It was my lack of sleep. And then my skin became quite bad from it. The physical manifestation of all of this started to occur. So those are the signs where if you're not feeling good within yourself, say sad or depressed or down for long periods of time where there's no joy, that's when I implore you to go out there and seek the help that you need.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about physical symptoms, actually, because I think it's something that maybe sometimes people don't realise or don't think about, that if you have a mental health condition like depression, there can be a whole array of physical symptoms that go alongside it. So you say it affected your skin.
Yeah, totally. And I'm not sure what came first, the lack of sleep or the bad skin, but I suffer from eczema.
Right.
And usually that is associated when I'm a bit stressed and anxious about stuff, and different times of the year, obviously, that's affected. But during my period of depression, my sleep was almost non-existent at one point, or I would sleep forever and have no energy, and I didn't want to get out of bed, and there was this feeling like I had this huge weighty helmet over my head just dragging me down constantly. And my skin was terrible. My eating patterns weren't great at all. It seems like it's like a house of cards, your mental health, and one thing goes, after a long period, lots of different things went for me.
And it cycles, doesn't it? Like one thing leads to another, which leads to another, which makes you feel worse.
Totally, yeah, exactly. Like drinking every night, even when you're feeling great, is bad for your skin, right? But when you've got this overwhelming feeling of sadness for a long period of time and you feel trapped and alone, it's for your entire nervous system and your body and your soul and your mind, everything starts to become corrupt by depression.
So Matt I know often people find it very difficult to ask for help, to open up, to let people know that they're experiencing something like depression. So when was the moment that you opened up, asked for help, shared with people?
So mine's a bit messed up.
Right.
So not long after my suicide attempt, my life completely changed. There was this new impetus of purpose. I ran a marathon for Mind, and I didn't really tell anybody about what I went through. So nobody knew. When I came back, it was around Christmas time. That Christmas was incredibly difficult for me, and nobody knew. They knew I was off, but nobody knew what just happened.
So you didn't tell anybody?
Didn't tell anyone.
That was just your secret, that you came that
That
close?
was my secret. That was
and
my
nobody knew.
disgusting secret. I was in shame,
Right.
and I was really, and as well, I was just living in this world I didn't think I'd be living in. I woke up from a sleep I thought I'd never wake up from.
Yeah.
And the world was a really weird, bleak place where I think luckily I did choose things like a marathon and like throw myself into career, positive kind of things
Yeah.
almost.
I think on that note, what advice would you give then to somebody who is struggling in silence with depression, and maybe they're watching this and realising it's depression, with all that shame and all that, negative, those negative thoughts? What advice would you give them?
I'd say treat it like it's a physical illness.
Yeah.
Go and see somebody about it and treat it like that. Like if you had a bang on your knee and you felt like you had an injury, you would go and see a physio or a doctor, or your GP, and it's the same. And that comes with self-value. I know how difficult that is, because you do have that voice in your head saying, it's all right, it'll pass. The good news is it can be treated and it can pass, and you will get out of this slump, but it'll only happen if you have the audacity to love yourself a little bit.
Just for that one
Just
moment,
that one
you need
moment,
to love
just
yourself
go,
enough.
Enough just to go and talk to someone.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. It could be to the barman. It could be to the bus driver. It could be to the person you sit next to. Open up. Get that stuff that's in here and in here out somewhere. And there's many different ways in which I've done that myself, because sometimes you haven't always got a safe person to talk about. So journaling is really, really important. And if you're a creative, write a song about it, do a poem about it, draw
What
a
a lot
paint.
of the best artists do,
Exactly,
don't they?
and it's just getting it off your chest. And I will say that it's the most liberating thing that you'll ever do. And it's the hardest thing, is that first step to say, I give a damn about myself enough to go and make that decision and go and make that change in my life.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Matt, thank you so
My
much for
absolute
being
pleasure.
so open and honest.
My
That was
pleasure.
it's an absolute present and gift to share that with us.
Thank you.
Do let us know in the chat if any of what Matt has said there resonated with you, and he'll be helping us answer your questions later on, so please do stick around for that. If you've been affected by any of the issues raised here and feel like you need some support, we've put some resources in the chat for you. Matt's story is one of many, and while there are definitely common themes, depression is extremely varied and affects people differently. So we did some of our own research here at Bupa. We asked 1,000 people who've lived with depression to share their own experiences, advice and thoughts about the condition. And this is just some of what they told us. As you can see there, depression can be really isolating, but greater understanding and small steps can help make it a less lonely experience. With that in mind, I'm delighted to introduce Kieran Calder. As I mentioned earlier, Kieran is Head of Therapy Services at Priory Hospital, North London, where she specialises in cognitive behavioural therapy. And Kieran has over 10 years' experience supporting people with their mental health and depression in particular, so she has loads of insights to share with us. Now, let's take a look at this diagram here. Don't worry, it's not a psychology lecture, but it is a practical and helpful way to break down the symptoms of depression and how it can manifest. Kieran and I will take you through it in simple terms, step by step, so you can understand what to look out for in yourself and others. So Kieran, firstly, thank you so much for being here today. Can you just give us a brief definition of what depression is, first of all?
Thanks for having me, Zoe. So depression is a common mental health problem that can impact any of us, and it's characterised by a feeling down, depressed or hopeless for the majority of 2-week period. Really what we're noticing is that this kind of problem would impact on several areas of our life and our daily functioning, which is different from person to person. So for the severity of the problem could be mild for somebody, moderate or severe, and then the set of symptoms that somebody is experiencing can vary from one person to another, and also how long they last.
And we know that depression is, of course, complex, but it's not always helpful for people to hear that. And there is a framework to help us understand much more about the symptoms and how it all works. So can you give us a description of what we've got here in front of us?
Sure. So this is the hot cross bun model.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a really simple way to understand depression. We use this a lot in cognitive behaviour therapy to think about what are the key aspects that keep depression going and how does this impact on somebody's life. So you can see that we begin with the triggers, and then there's 4 areas here that are the main areas that impact on depression in our lives.
Okay, well, let's break it down. Let's start off with this section, triggers at the top. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the trigger, if we think about when depression begins, some people can really pinpoint a starting point and an event or a stressful situation that started off the problem for them. But, often we talked about depression lasting for 2 weeks or more. Some people can take weeks, months or years for them to reach out for help. And at that point, it might be that they can't even remember what's brought them here and what that initial trigger was. Or it could be a build-up of several situations. But I would use this to think about understand how we feel in the here and now. So is there a trigger, maybe a situation or event when you felt at your worst that we can use to really unpack and understand what's happening and what's keeping this problem going now?
Okay. And that can lead to all of the changes that we're going to see on the screen. But let's start off with thoughts. What thoughts might somebody experience?
Yeah, so really here what we're thinking about is this kind of negative light that impacts on every way that we're thinking about something, impacts on how we think about ourselves and the world and things that are happening around us. And there's some really common negative thinking styles that come up here. Some of them are self-critical thinking, so really thinking about everything we do in our harshest critic in that sort of form. Mind reading, what someone else is thinking about us, and that being a negative perception. Catastrophizing, so what we mean by that is thinking about the worst case scenario in everything that's happening. Or one of the most common patterns I notice is emotional reasoning. When we feel bad and we feel low and hopeless, then things must be bad.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And thoughts definitely feed into our feelings. So tell us about this section here, feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we're thinking back to in any given situation, we have perceived or thought about this in a negative light. So that's then going to create an emotion for us. And if we're thinking about something in a negative way, it's a negative emotion that arises.
And then what about behaviours? What type of behaviours might somebody with depression have?
So again, thinking back from here, I always like to start here because if we thought about something in a negative way, we felt a certain way about it, then it will impact on what we feel able to do or whether we have the desire to do or the lack of motivation and energy to do something. So here are the behaviours we see, things like withdrawal, avoiding things that we used to do in our life, the things that maybe used to bring us pleasure and they're not anymore. So we see ourselves kind of withdrawing from that activity.
And when I learned about cognitive behavioural therapy in medical school, this is what I learned. But I feel like the physical symptoms, which is now on this hot cross bun model, is a really important part of it. So I'm really pleased to see that there. Talk us through the physical symptoms.
Absolutely, I agree with you, because I think that part of this is about helping individuals to really understand that there is an emotional impact, and this is a mental health problem, but it's also very physical. And thinking a certain way and feeling a certain way emotionally does trigger physical sensations in the body. And those are things like the lack of energy, the lack of motivation or drive, that get up and go is gone. It impacts on our sleep. And this is again where this can vary from person to person, because one person might be really struggling to sleep, they can't get to sleep or stay asleep, and another person might be oversleeping. And the same for appetite. We find some people lose their appetite and other people are eating or snacking more than usual.
And I think everybody, whether you experience depression or not, we can all think of emotions that link into physical feelings and sensation, can't they? So my tummy flipped, or I got butterflies, and that's caused by an emotion, so it does make sense. Can you give us an example to sort of tie it all in together of how somebody with depression might start working around this framework?
Sure. So if we use the example of even the simplest trigger of, having a really stressful day at work, you get at home, you're in bed, you're lying there ready to go to sleep. And at that point, we've got time on our hands and we start to think. And at this point, we maybe start unpicking the day and ruminating over the detail of what you've been doing. So this might be where we see the common negative thinking styles coming up. I should have done better. I could have tried harder at work today, or I'm a failure. I'm no good at my job, and those self-critical thinking patterns coming up and worrying about how somebody's perceived you.
And then, so how would that then link into the other labels on the model?
Well, I think if I was thinking those things, I'd definitely feel really low and stressed. And
so that's how we bring into the feelings.
Absolutely, frustrated with myself maybe. And so it's not just the sadness that we notice here. It might be that we experience guilt or shame or anger or frustration and agitation, hopelessness, the helplessness. There's so many emotions that come up, not just the feeling sad.
So a thought can lead to all those emotions, then how does that play out in physical symptoms and behaviours?
Yeah, so I would say then, if we're feeling low, that might be then having an impact on our body physically. We then start to feel quite lethargic, we lose our energy and motivation, or we're struggling to concentrate, because when all of those thoughts are whirring around in your mind, that's what you're focused on. And of course, if you feel like that, that doesn't make you feel most confident going into situations. So it might be the next day, we're avoiding things that we had planned for ourselves, or we don't feel that we're showing up as our best, so we cancel on our friends, we don't want to go to work and put ourselves forward for the next opportunity.
And then you can see, being in bed that night, the thoughts are, didn't show up for my friends, and round we go again.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. This cycle really helps us to look at what's maintaining depression and how each area impacts on each area, and why these arrows, they go double-ended, because they all feed in. And once we're noticing this, we can see how it can easily keep us stuck in depression.
So we can see that the trigger causes the thoughts, but then every single label is attached to every single other label, isn't it? So then can you break this cycle then? Is this the positive good news?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to use this to understand where we are, why we feel how we're feeling, but also thinking about now, how do we break that cycle and how do we start to feel better? And in cognitive behaviour therapy, the two key areas for us are going to be the cognitions, those thoughts, and working on those negative thinking patterns, and then the behaviours, those things that we're maybe not doing or avoiding now, or the unhelpful strategies or behaviours that we want to stop.
And if people are watching this and recognising that they experience these types of cycles, thinking maybe they have depression, what can they do?
I think it's first of all understanding that this is something that we understand very well, and then once we know what we're dealing with, we can then start to teach strategies to reframe those thoughts. Is there another way of looking at this situation? Instead of that negative view, really trying to take a step back and look at whether this is really reflecting reality. Are there any facts to support what you're thinking? A quick way to do that might be to ask your friend. If your friend was feeling like that, what would you say to them? Or the other way around, if you told them what you were thinking, what would they say to you? And that gives you a different perception, which will then have a knock-on effect on how you feel.
Okay, that makes it really clear. I think it's true to say, isn't it, that when it comes to depression, it might be the people around the person that actually pick up on signs before the person even realises themselves. So if you are worried about a loved one, how can you start that conversation to bring up the topic?
Sure, I think you're right. The people closest to us are the ones that notice a change first. So they know us very well. And I think, first of all, it's maybe acknowledging that not everybody's good at talking about how they feel. And this is a sensitive topic. You know, our emotions are very private, but, you know, there's nothing wrong with talking about it. So maybe just acknowledging and stepping into that person's shoes and applying some compassion. So going in there sensitively and not trying to apply pressure. And maybe just talking to them about why you're concerned about them and how you might be able to help them.
Okay, thank you so much. And Matt, I'd love to ask you about that. As someone who's probably had these conversations, what would you add to that?
Well, from my perspective, it's very important for the person that's asking somebody how they are and giving them advice to be as calm as possible and to choose an environment that's calm, you know, not to do it in a nightclub or in a pub. But even if it does come up in conversation, you know, it could be anywhere on a bus stop or in a pub or whatever, in a coffee shop, it's really important to be there and listen. And not to try and fix the person whilst they're there or diminish their experience by saying, you know, everybody goes through that if you're struggling. You know, really sit there and people say hold that space, but that's really important, just to be somebody that listens and gives them an opportunity to then share.
And it can be harder said than done, can't it? Because we want to get in, we want to fix, we want to make them feel better, we want to say, oh, it'll be fine, because you want them to feel better, but actually they're not going to feel better if you say that. So just listening, really, really listening.
It's happened to me, actually. I was in a relationship a few years ago, and I said, like, I'm really struggling with the change of my life because I've asked for change with therapy and everything's changing around me. I'm really struggling with that. And she went, oh, that happens to everyone. And I was like, no, I can't talk to you about it because I just wanted to open up more and explore what that feeling was. But it can happen to everyone. And I know she definitely just wanted me not to be in a state of panic or to worry about it. She wanted to put extinguish the fire as such, but it just happens.
Comes from a good place, but just zip it.
It really does, yeah, it does.
Okay, well, hopefully that's given you a better understanding of the cyclical nature of depression. But now let's focus on the things that can help us manage and combat this cycle. So Kieran, Matt and I are going to talk you through some suggestions, but if you have any advice or things that you found useful for your own mental health, please do share them in the chat because we'd love to get your tips as well. So guys, when we talk about managing depression, I think we can kind of break it up into 4 broad categories. So professional and medical support, social support, wellbeing activities, and then taking action. So let's dive a bit deeper into all of them. First up, Kieran, what are some of the professional support strategies or approaches that people can look into?
So I'd recommend talking therapies like cognitive behaviour therapy, because that really gives us an opportunity to understand the cycle we were going through. You know, for that individual person, what is it specifically that's keeping them stuck? So their thinking patterns and behavioural patterns. And then once we understand what's happening for that person, then we can tailor strategies specifically to them. And, you know, just noticing that there are different levels of CBT and that really needs to be tailored to that person and what's going on for them at that moment in time.
When you say different levels of CBT, I think a lot of us, me included, may have been through the sort of lower level of CBT. How does that get stepped up? How does it differ?
So we've looked today at a real simple cycle that focuses on the here and now and the present. And, you know, often that's enough because it's more about, you know, what's happening today and how can we change that and what changes do we need to make to see a change. But if that isn't working, then sometimes we want to delve a little bit deeper and look at those negative thinking patterns for that person. What is it in the foundations or early life that's happened for that person that's really taught them an impact on their core beliefs? So that's kind of the foundations of what I think about myself as a person, the world around me, and that trickles down into your day-to-day thinking patterns and how you're going to view things, especially if you're struggling.
And Matt, what role has professional support played for you?
So talking therapy really helped me. And as you were just saying very eloquently, it was really important for me to have that conversation about where this all came from and to explore that, what traumas or what significant events from my past was impeding on the way I thought about myself. Like I said, didn't feel lovable, didn't feel like I belonged, and I wasn't good enough. So when I was able to then pinpoint that that's how I felt, and that's my core belief system, then I explored the why that was the way, and then through more talking therapies and some coaches and some wild retreats that I've tried and all that type of stuff, I've been able to really tackle and really impose new habits and new ways of thinking because of that. But talking therapy really helped me, and it still helps me to this day.
You still
Yeah,
have a
always.
therapist?
Yeah. It's important for me. I mean, we're in this line of work. I'm a very different line of work for what you guys do, but I'm an ambassador for charities, and people come to me for advice, and I need to know what I'm talking about. So for me to protect myself and to help other people, it's so important to keep the therapy going.
And we know that there is a place for medication for some people that can really help, but there's a lot of stigma, I think, around medication, especially at the moment. What are your thoughts on that, Kieran?
Absolutely agree. You know, a lot of people worried about whether it's going to be addictive or if they're going to experience any side effects from this medication. So what I'd usually do is reassure that it's an option, and actually we get the best results when CBT is combined with medication. The medications that we use aren't addictive nowadays, and that actually can be really helpful. And I suppose the end goal is about replacing that medication with those tools. So it's a short-term solution to support someone and give them that bit of a boost that they need to get engaged with the therapy.
Yeah, I think I often explain it to patients as, you've heard the analogy of the sort of bumpers on the bath, where if the bath is kind of your stress that you can tolerate, and the water going into the bath is the stress, and the plug is, you know, the things that help alleviate our stress, be that exercise or seeing friends. There's an imbalance when, if the water's going in too quick before it can drain, it can overflow. And what I often explain to patients, whilst medication isn't for everybody, for some people it can be helpful to almost bolster make the bath a bit bigger for a temporary period, whilst you do things to make the plug bigger, which can be the therapy, or it can be, you know, getting better social support. So it can almost just buy you a bit of time whilst you do the work. But on its own, the medication usually isn't going to fix things. What are your thoughts, Matt?
I'm very open-minded with it, whatever it takes, really. And I think this is the thing. I don't believe in blindly just giving people drugs to fix a problem. But a friend of mine experienced some traumatic news that he was going to have to face with a terminal cancer diagnosis with loved ones. And he was very interesting to me. He had therapy, he had numerous tools. I'm there, you know, hanging on by the side, being like, let's go for a walk, let's talk, let's do whatever it takes. But they had medication throughout that entire period. And you're absolutely right, it just kind of kept everything together and helped him through this really dark period. So that was an interesting perspective of getting ahead of it and anticipating this grief period and this really bad period. And it really seemed to work. And then when you do it properly, you're able to come off these drugs and utilize your tools and talking therapies. And it's, you know, each to their own. Again, with all of this, it's all independent to that person going through what they're going through.
100%. Stigma's never helpful, so let's get rid of that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay, so the next thing I have here on my list is social support. Kieran, why is connecting with others so important when we are experiencing depression?
Well, I think, like we saw with the cycle, it can isolate us and bring us out of life and all of the things that we tend to do that keep us healthy. So it's really important to connect with people, and a little bit like you're talking about your friend, you know, if we talk about how we feel, it maybe can help to validate how we feel and understand. And sometimes it's just about knowing that actually it's okay to feel this way. It makes sense why I feel this way, but how can I connect with people and use that support around me to help me through? And, you know, as social beings, we need that connection.
Matt, you told us for a long time you really didn't have social support for the issues, but since then, how was...
And that's the thing. I think I would have if I just talked about it. I think I would have had the most amazing experience, and I wouldn't have felt the way I felt. And right now, I utilize the social support all the time. I've got great friends who are very open-minded men to talk to. I have a great therapist, and I got great friends within this industry, and my family. I'm very open about what I feel. And so I think it's incredibly important to have great friendship groups, because you can't rely on your wife or your partner for the entire time to be your carer. So having numerous pockets of people that you can talk to really does help. And again, that for a man, specifically from my perspective, that was the hardest part. And it's also when you know when you do it and you utilize it, it's the most frequently used part and the bit that you shouldn't be scared about.
The third area is wellbeing activities. So Matt, what kinds of things can be helpful here?
I mean, there's so many. I've got so many tools. For me, I think getting in touch into my body. So without me getting too far ahead of the game and being anxious about life or dwelling too much, to be present and in the moment is very important. So the big tools for me there is nature. My dog was very helpful in that capacity, and the communication I have with friends. But the very act of you doing something for yourself, whether it's a massage or just going for a little mental health walk. And I don't want to say it, it sounds controversial, but having a quick pint with your friends, like just taking the time, spending that time to honor your feeling and doing something in a mindful way is super important. So yes, there's so many activities, like try yoga, do Tai Chi, boxing, get rid of that energy, and when you join a football club, you feel a part of something, you've got responsibility. There's so many tools out there, but a lot of it is to be present. And, that could be cycling through London. Nothing makes you more present than the fear of death from a bus.
It's true.
It's
true. Well, there is evidence out there that certain, like we know that physical activity and exercise is an incredible tool for preventing and managing depression. But there are some forms of exercise that are better than others. And one of them is, when I did this, I read this study, it was bouldering, where it's anything actually where there's an element of danger. Because if there's an element of danger, you have no choice but to be mindful. You don't have time to be ruminating or thinking about the past or thinking about the future. You've got to be right there because your life depends on it.
Totally.
So anything with the element of danger.
And I think that's it. Finding the right thing for you in that moment. So having all the tools in all the world at your disposal is there on the internet now. But knowing which one's right for you, that's a real experience. That's real presence, and that's real self-care. Is when you know, like, I'm triggered by something, and it feels like in this part of my body. So maybe meditation's not going to work right now. Maybe I need to go and yell into the void, or go for a really stompy walk or something. So knowing yourself is super, super important.
Kieran, any examples of things that might be helpful here?
I think in general, behaviours covers so much, behavioural tools in CBT. I would probably say don't underestimate the power of a good routine, because it's those basics that are really important. They give us structure and they help us. It's really important within that routine that we have those activities that, our chores, that we're getting on top of those things so they don't overwhelm us, but also that we balance that out with the pleasurable activities and the things that bring us joy. Like you said, nutrition comes into that. It might be setting yourself one goal a day to make sure you have breakfast in the morning, and keeping that constant. So fueling your body and those small things that we think we do day in, day out, but when we're depressed, we can really struggle to keep on top of. It can take a lot of energy to get up in the morning and have your shower. So I think it's about not being ashamed to set those goals that might have seemed usual before, but if we don't focus on them as goals, we're not going to be able to get back to those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I always bang on about physical activity because that's my job, but I think it's important to say, if you're experiencing depression, if you're suffering from depression, actually getting up and getting out the door and moving your body can feel just too much. It can feel overwhelming. But I do always share with my patients that, yes, we have these options of different tools. Of course, we have talking therapy, we have antidepressants. But, there are lots of studies now that show that, regular exercise, especially things like group running twice a week, can be as effective as taking antidepressants. So I think, it's really important that people know just how effective they can be, because that might be just the thing that just gets them over that hurdle of motivation to just get outside and go
Great
for
for dating as well, those runs.
Well, yes, they are. I believe
because
people
that
are
human
taking it up,
connection
aren't
is really
they?
important. Getting out the house, and I think just that spark, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself here, it's just that endorphins or whatever it comes from it, the spark is so important, and try anything. Try whatever it takes.
I would say, to try and do the opposite action, what the depression is telling us. We feel like we just don't have that in us to do this. Try and activate your body. Even the treatment is called behavioural activation for a reason, because, typically when we're unwell, we stop and we rest to recuperate. But actually with depression, we really want to do the opposite. We want to get up and get going, and that's what's going to help us.
Can things like nutrition have an impact on depression too?
Yes, there's a lot of information now about the impact and the link between the gut and the brain. So I would say that anything you put in your body is going to have an impact on your mental health, and that then, you know, makes us think a little bit more about our diet and what's good for us, and the impact that that will have on our mood or our energy levels and how we're going to feel.
So what sort of things would you recommend somebody would eat to, you know, to look after their mental health, which I think is quite an unusual concept for a lot of people to get their head around, but there is evidence around it.
I think we're looking for a range of different fresh fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds, and those things that we know are full of those vitamins that are good for us, and that then also impacts on, you know, how our brain is functioning and our mood.
And I can see you nodding along that.
Yeah, I think this is really touched me, because I noticed a dip in my mood depending on what my diet is, whether it's drinking too much alcohol or too much coffee, etc. And there is, for somebody like me, that the benchmark is quite low to get myself just to an average human's level of happiness. I've got to give myself a fighting chance.
Yeah.
So in every opportunity I can see, I'm always looking at what I can do, what I can control.
Yeah.
And usually it's things like diet, and obviously what you consume on your phone or and other types of diets, but you know, food intake and getting a nice balance of vegetables and nutrients really does help. And I come from the class of, it would have been really annoying if somebody said to me 15 years ago, you should maybe try and eating healthy.
Yeah, yeah.
But it does help. Controlling what you can control and what you put into your body does really make a difference. Even if it's the act of caring about what you put into your body.
Yeah,
you know?
that self-care, the self-care.
Yeah, there's an act of self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is like really good evidence behind it. So it's about 10 years ago, there was a study called the SMILES trial, where they utilised a Mediterranean diet as an intervention for people who had depression, and it was really positive. The results were really positive. That diet can even be used as a treatment. So, you know, again, for some people, when they're feeling really bad, it might not be an area that they feel they can tackle, but for other people, it will. And the more options people have,
and it's really
the
difficult as
better.
well in certain social economic situations. Some people can't afford certain diets and all that type of stuff. But again, it's that act of choosing what's right for you and good for you. And it might not be perfect, but trying is super helpful for your self-esteem.
And that brings us perfectly into the last area, which is about taking action. It's called taking action. So even those really small steps, by taking those small steps, whether it is just brushing your teeth, getting in the shower, things that you might normally take for granted just happen, just taking action. So that's just really important, isn't it?
Yeah, because I think that, you know, when we don't feel like doing something, we don't have that desire or that motivation, it can be easy to, you know, take on board our feelings and make judgments or decisions based on how we feel. So I would always say, you know, try and make the decision for what you know you need in the future, what's going to help you, rather than how you're feeling right now, and letting those emotions make those decisions for you.
Matt, do you have any of those examples of small actions that you've utilised over the years for when you're struggling?
A big thing for me is journaling, and you
Right.
check in whilst I journal. And it's quite difficult to get into the routine, but the routine is the key for me. And it's just simple things. And I do go through dips from time to time, and it's simple things like making your bed and brushing your teeth, you know, going for a little walk, picking up a coffee, not having it in the house, going somewhere else, and maybe having that little chat with somebody. It's the most basic things in life that our small accomplishments are so huge. This is what is really interesting about this conversation, is that these are not small things. These are really important things, and just sometimes getting out of bed when you've got depression is difficult. So when you get out and you make your bed and you have a shower, regardless of whether you're seeing anybody that day, it's just these small things, when they add up, they are very, very important.
It's kind of that idea of just moving, isn't it? Moving forwards. Like just a little thing, it gets you moving forwards through the day in the right direction. And then for people who are watching this, who aren't suffering with depression themselves, but maybe they have a loved one or somebody they care about, somebody they work about who does, what advice would you give them? I guess, Matt, from your experience over the years, have you had friends who've done really kind things for you, or other people that you've really appreciated?
Yeah, I mean, because when I came out about my depression, it was quite public. The overwhelming support was amazing. But it's those small moments. I went through a dip in my depression last year, and it was for about a month or so, and I talked to my friend at the end of it, and he said, what can I do next time what can I have done better? What can I have done? I thought, just thought that was so intelligent and so smart. And it's just asking that question, what can I do? If this ever happens to you, what are the signs? Give me like a little emoji you send me to let me know whether I should come around and just put some milk out for you or something. And it's those small moments. And I've been deeply depressed in certain parts of the world, and certain people have gone, you okay? And that, I mean, those small moments, and we haven't had a chat, I didn't open up, but it was just like, somebody cares. And I think if we had more people that showed that they care, because we all do, I believe, I think the world would be a lot better off. Just those small moments have really helped me. They've just given me a little spark of kindness.
Thank you both for sharing. I think, we covered a lot of ground there, but hopefully people have some takeaways, some real sort of practical tips and ideas to start regaining control. But there is more on the way. So you've sent in some really interesting questions. Thank you so much for that. You sent them in on the chat, and I'll just get started, I think. Let's get straight into it. So first question is one for Kieran. I think my mum has depression, but she won't get help for it. How can I persuade her to see somebody?
I mean, that's a really difficult situation to be in, isn't it, when you care deeply for somebody that's close to you. So first of all, I think it's just acknowledging that's really hard. And then, what I want to be doing is just, again, opening up a conversation to that person and letting them know that they're not alone and that they are worthy of help. I think that's really important, because sometimes, we can see someone struggling and we want them to get help. But if somebody's not ready, it's not the right time for them, pushing them in that direction isn't going to help them. So I would want to be saying, actually, you're really worthy of the help and you deserve it, and I'm here for you. And even if we get to a point then when you are ready to accept that help, you could go with her to the appointments and, go to book an appointment with the GP and just support.
And I guess, Matt, as someone who, in a way, was in that position yourself, what would your suggestions be?
The same. If anybody in your family or loved one is in distress, approaching this conversation in a delicate way and from an empathetic way, this is how I feel, I'm worried, and then offering to go with them, I think would be a huge thing. I'm in this with you, I'm in the trenches with you. That's such an easy thing to say, but I mean, when you show up for somebody, that's such a big step, and to do that in a kind and soft and gentle way like that would be remarkable.
And I think something I'd add to that, nowadays, general practice, we're using the e-consult more and more. So if actually going and showing up in front of a GP and talking about this just feels too overwhelming, you can actually just put it on an e-consult and then they will contact you, maybe a slightly easier into asking for the professional help. So maybe your mum would feel more comfortable doing that together with you. Next question is, it's one for Matt. No, it's not, it's one for me, sorry. I've been on antidepressants for almost 3 months now, but I don't feel any different. What do I do now? So if you've been taking antidepressants for 3 months and they're not working, it's definitely time to go back to the GP and be reassessed. 3 months is long enough to see if they're working, and if there's no improvement whatsoever, there are lots of other options to explore, including changing the antidepressant, changing the dose, or looking at many of the other strategies that we've spoken about today. So if it's not working, please go back and let your GP know so that you can be reassessed and try something else. Okay, the next one. I'm worried about my teenage son. He's not been himself and won't talk to us. Can children get depression? And what should I do? Kieran, I think this one might be for you.
Sure, children absolutely can get depression. I think it's really important that if you're concerned about your child, you book in to see a GP and you don't wait to get help. There's nothing wrong with getting help sooner rather than later. I think there's no ideal time. The earlier you go, the better. And then there's trained professionals. The cycle we looked at earlier today, CBT can be tailored to the learning styles and strategies that suit children, and there's professionals who are trained to offer that work. So absolutely the same advice, go and get help.
And so, the sooner the better, isn't it? Because I think if things are going to get worse, the sooner treatment starts, the quicker and the more easily actually it can be managed.
And there's so many platforms and resources out there. If any parent is curious or worried, concerned about anyone in their family having any mental illness, there's so many bits of information out there. So educating yourself and knowing what's right for your kid is very important.
And I think some of those sort of lifestyle well-being things that we spoke about, it's never ever too early to start instigating those. So if it's
Absolutely.
your child, if it is a form of physical activity you can do with them, going for a walk with them, just going outside and kicking a ball with them, which might actually be an easier way for them to start opening up as well, rather than the intensity of having a conversation with a child.
I was going to say driving in the car, because you're not facing each other, those things.
Absolutely. Okay, the next question. I'm really struggling at the moment to see an end in sight. Will I always have depression? Kieran, is there any advice you can offer there?
Yeah, I think when you're in that feeling, what you're thinking feels really plausible.
Yeah.
So I think it's just about us reassuring as a professional or somebody around you who you're able to talk to let you know that depression doesn't have to last forever and there is help out there, and actually recovery isn't a smooth journey, so we don't just get better and stay better. Emotions kind of come in all different forms and intensities in life, so I think the key is that depression is treatable, and you can get better with the right type of help, with the right people around you and the right strategies. And one of the things that I find working with individuals in therapy is that sometimes a tool that we've chosen to start with first isn't necessarily the one that's going to be helpful, or doesn't apply to every situation. So we do need to do a bit of problem solving together to learn what best suits that person. And there are so many options. I can't think of a time that I'd run out of options in my toolkit to help somebody to problem solve or alter how they're using what we're learning to apply and help them. So I think things will get better, absolutely.
So we've had lots of comments coming in about preventing depression from coming back. Is it possible to stay on top of it, Kieran?
Yeah, I think it's hard to predict how we're ever going to feel in life and what's going to come up that impacts on how we feel. But the strategies that we teach in cognitive behaviour therapy are all about breaking that cycle and making us unstuck if we're stuck. But also, if we're healthy and well, we keep using those same strategies to keep us healthy. So, don't wait until you think it's bad enough to get the help and to use the strategies. Keep using the learning and applying it every day. That's what's going to keep us healthy.
Yeah. And Matt, is there anything you found beneficial here?
Gosh, so much of it. I think the main learning points are for me is that it's finding out what's right for you. And that first spark of, I think I need to get some help is so important. So when you do, it's a wonderful journey. It's a curious journey to find out what works for you, what tools work for you, and try everything. Try everything, because it's worth it. It really is.
Yeah. And then I once heard a tip, having a little box, and when you feel yourself that you feel that you're going into depression or whatever those symptoms feel like for you, you go to your box, because when you're feeling well, that's when you can best determine what it would be. It might be your best friend's phone number. Oh, that's a reminder that person said to send that emoji. Or it might be going back to that coffee shop that you like every morning and sitting there because the sun on your face, or whatever works for you, because everybody's different.
Absolutely. And I think as well, like you just said, is that this is not for when people are unwell. These tools are useful when you are feeling good, because I normally, if I'm feeling good, I'm not doing my journaling and I'm not doing my certain things, and then it can accumulate. So to get ahead of this, to help prevent this, even if you haven't had a period of depression, life is tricky and it throws curveballs all the time. So if you have this awareness of tools and you have these talking therapies at hand already, you're in for a fighting chance.
And I also say, try not to be too strict on yourself. If you have a day where you think, I need to have a lie-in and I need to stay in bed today, that's okay. But if it starts to happen then, for 3-4 days in a row, then that's when we're starting to notice, okay, maybe this is kind of me slipping into that cycle again. So let's just pick up on that and do something.
I'm fully on board with hermit mode. Every now and then I need to switch everything off.
Just
shut the door. Duvet days I can do, and exactly that. I know after a few days probably that's, for me to get back into the world. But sometimes switching off, because the world you're so connected and there's so much noise and everything, the internet and all that type of stuff. There's a lot of responsibilities, and turn on the news for 5 minutes, it can be quite depressing. So to switch off and knowing if that's right for you or not, super important. Hermit mode is
watch Netflix series.
It's the art of balance, isn't it? Balancing out, how much do we need that relaxation, the things that slow us down, but then also the things that give us energy and activate us. And
I guess it's learning about yourself, isn't it? Because like you said, Matt, going and having a pint with a mate at the pub can be a great thing to do. But if you find yourself starting to drink at home and maybe drinking, you know, whiskey or whatever it is, so it's not about necessarily, but it's different for different people. But having a duvet day every now and again, fine.
Exactly.
Spending a whole week in bed.
Possibly not. It's all about balance, isn't it? You know, some people could be prescribed joining a choir, going to bed, going to see a friend or anything, but it's all particular and very unique to that person. And that's why I think that self-exploration is super important.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And those are all the questions that we have time for today. And huge thanks to Kieran, huge thanks to Matt for joining us. Before we wrap up, I would also like to mention some useful resources. If you are at all struggling and you want to speak to a GP, Bupa customers can book a virtual appointment via your My Bupa app or via My Bupa online. And there's also our dedicated mental health page. And you can find a link to our downloadable depression guide in the resources section, which has lots of detail on the condition and practical support. But if you or someone you love have any thoughts about harming yourself, please don't hang about, call 999 or talk to the Samaritans on 116 123. Help is available and things really do get better. By understanding depression, we can make a difference to those living with this condition. So please keep an eye on your inbox too, as we'll be sending out a recording of this video, as well as lots more advice on depression and looking after your mental health. And we'd also love to know what your thoughts were about today's event. So we'll be popping a short questionnaire in the chat and would really appreciate your views. So until next time, take care.